As you are taking the whole group.
The speaker of this session is Andreas Haas, and he is perfectly suited to this meeting because his title is exactly the same as the title of the meeting.
That's kind of what I got here. But so I'm actually going to be talking about structure, function, and dynamics of marine microbial communities, and how the function, the dynamics get influenced by changing benthic environments. So due to local anthropogenic influences like overfishing or pollution of the oceans, and overall global impacts like the warming acidification of the oceans, we get so-called phase shifts in the dominance of benthic primary producers. And those phase shifts usually go from systems which are dominated by calcifying organisms. There was this nice little sticky. Thank you. By calcifying primary producers towards ecosystems which are dominated by non-calcifying primary producers like fleshy macroalgae or turf algae. And those primary producers are actually pretty important for the ecosystem functioning, as they influence a variety of different parameters. Obviously, as they are primary producers, they influence the oxygen availability and the organic carbon availability in the surrounding. They also influence the pH values, and some of them actually calcify, so they also build their own structures and they build their own habitats. And most of the biggest structures on this planet are built by corals, like the Great Barrier Reef. And one thing I've been particularly interested in is how they actually supply organic nutrients to the surrounding. And we looked at a variety of ecosystems and measured the organic carbon release rates of the different primary producers, and we could find that the different functional groups of primary producers release significantly different quantities and qualities of the exudates. And one thing which is particularly important for the whole thing and interesting is that fleshy macroalgae and turf algae, in all the systems we analyzed, they always release higher amounts of dissolved organic carbon into the surrounding than the calcifying organisms, and especially the corals did. So that's one thing we established pretty good so far, I guess. But then we actually went out into the environment and looked at the concentrations of dissolved organic carbon in different environments. And this was the first study which a colleague of mine, Craig Nelson, did. And he went to the Back Reef system in Moorea, French Polynesia. And the Back Reef system here is pretty much dominated by fleshy algae, not by calcifying organisms. And he took an area of DOC concentration measurements along the whole system, and he saw that with increasing amounts of algae in the system, he had really low DOC concentrations in the water column, which was a little bit surprising in the beginning, right? And those DOC concentrations were even lower than the DOC concentrations outside in the offshore waters, and lower than the semi-label standing stock of DOC, which is usually not metabolized by microbes in those environments. So that was pretty interesting. And then next step was I collected a whole lot of data from different reef systems pretty much across the whole world. So we have a lot of data from the Central Pacific here. This is the Line Islands chain. Then we also had a whole lot of data from all around the Caribbean, and we had some measurements from the Indian Ocean here, and altogether we had 60 sampling locations in 3 different ocean basins. And what we could see in all those 3 sampling, or in all those ocean basins, was that there always was a pretty good correlation of higher abundances of algae in those systems with lower DOC concentrations. And that was visible everywhere we looked so far. So obviously, the only thing, we know algae release more, and we get lower DOC concentrations. So obviously the next thing to do was look at the microbial communities, because we know the microbes are probably the most abundant thing utilizing the DOC, the immediately released DOC. So in Moria, we started off with a couple of incubation experiments to look at this, and we could see that microbial communities growing on turf algae exudates had significantly higher growth rates than the ones growing on our seawater controls and the ones growing on our coral exudates. And again, I went back to the data set, which we collected across all those ocean basins, and within each of those ocean systems, we could see it's not as pretty as the first one, but we could see that the lower DOC concentrations, which are associated with higher abundance of algae, were also associated with higher concentrations of microbes in each of those systems. So we know we get more algae, more microbes, and that leads to lower DOC concentrations. The next step then was we looked actually how the different exudates, the different DOC sources change the microbial community. And again, this is from the studies we did in Moria. We incubated offshore microbial communities in different carbon sources derived from corals and derived from algae and in open ocean water. And we could see that those different carbon sources selected for different microbial communities. So the ones here, which were growing on seawater and in our water controls, there are water controls, were significantly different than the ones selected for by coral exudates, and both of them were significantly different than the ones selected for by algae exudates. And one interesting thing to note here is that the microbial communities selected for by algae exudates were mostly copiotrophic communities, which contained families including known coral pathogens like Vibrio or Pseudoalteromona. So, okay, that kind of shows how the microbial community grew more, and it kind of changed into more copiotrophic microbial community, but it didn't really explain how this kind of altered microbial community then is actually able to tap deeper into this refractory DOC pool, which is usually not touched by the microbial community. And to understand how this might be going or how this might be working, we also luckily had a variety of metagenomes across a gradient of benthic cover. So we had 11 metagenomes, 9 from the 9 islands, 2 from the Caribbean, and 5 of them were in algae-dominated systems. 6 of them we got from coral-dominated systems, where we just pretty much analyzed the metagenomes of 100 liters of seawater taken from each of those systems. And so I took those metagenomes and I ran them against the KEGG protein database, and as I wanted to know what's going on with the DOC in the system, the one thing I focused on was the central carbohydrate metabolism as defined by the KEGG database. And the modules in the KEGG database for the central carbohydrate metabolism were the Emden-Meyerhof-Pernas pathway, the pentose phosphate pathway, and the ED pathway, which are kind of the pathways, the 3 alternatives which you would use to break down sugars into pyruvate, and then obviously the citric acid cycle, which is the final pathway which takes pyruvate and remineralizes it in CO2. And it became pretty clear, so it pretty much in all the systems we looked at, we could see that the EMP pathway, which is usually assumed, like most people refer to it as this glycolysis, it's this EMP pathway, genes encoding for this one were way more abundant in the coral-dominated systems, whereas genes encoding for the alternative pathways were more abundant in algae-dominated systems. And also genes encoding for the citric acid cycle were also more abundant in algae-dominated systems, which just kind of shows that the potential for carbon remineralization is higher in those algae-dominated systems. But the interesting thing is why you change the pathways, right? This is again based on the KEGG database. The blue arrows indicate the modules which where we found genes in higher abundance in the coral-dominated sites. The red ones are those where the abundance was higher in algae-dominated sites. And as Thomas explained yesterday already pretty nicely. So the EMP pathway is based on the stoichiometry of the reactants and products, is probably the most efficient or effective pathway. So you get 2 ADP through your breakdown from a C6 sugar down to pyruvate. But there have to be situations or environmental situations where those other two pathways are more beneficial or superior, right? Otherwise, those other two pathways would have been vanished throughout evolution. And I read a couple of other papers, and I actually found some good literature, and which shows some explanations how those other pathways could be beneficial in different situations. So first of all, there seems to be a trade-off between the ADP production during the carbon breakdown and the thermodynamic driving force. So for instance, the early production of pyruvate here in the ED pathway compared to the EMP pathway generates heat, and through the generation of heat, I guess you can avoid some thermodynamic bottlenecks, which would make it harder to use that pathway. And so through this early produced heat, the ED pathway is actually able, or let's say the other way around, the EMP pathway requires up to 3.5 times more higher protein or enzyme levels than the ED pathway to generate the same amount of pyruvate than the other pathway. And apparently this becomes more and more important if you rely on more oxidized carbon sources. And from earlier work on refractory organic carbon, I think Craig Carlson did that earlier. They showed that the semi-label, or this refractory organic carbon pool in the oceans, tends to be more oxidized than the nearshore environments. So I guess this could be one mechanism how the altered microbial community is actually able to tap deeper into the refractory organic carbon pool here. Another mechanism, I guess, or the second pathway we found was upregulated or not upregulated. Genes were higher abundant in the algae pathways and the algae sites with the PP pathway. And this pathway allows for the utilization of different substrate than the EMP pathway. There were some previous studies who actually showed that organisms which were not able to use the PP pathway were not able to grow on all those different substrates as their primary carbon source, whereas the wild types, which still had the ability to use the PP pathway, they grew pretty good on those carbon sources. So this again might be another mechanism how you can actually tap deeper into the refractory carbon pool there. And so the conclusions from this is, first of all, it's pretty clear that the anthropogenic changes of the benthic environment affect the microbial community dynamics in all those ecosystems out there. But this phenomenon we see, that more DOC release from the different primary producers ends up in lower DOC levels, which actually are lower than the semi-label standing stock, might be explained by algae exudate fueled enhanced microbial community metabolism. And two lines of evidence kinda support this theory. First, we see an increase in the overall heterotrophic community metabolism as we see a higher abundance of genes encoding for the citric acid cycle, and we see faster growth rates of those microbial communities. Secondly, there is a change in the pathways in carbohydrate breakdown, and this change might enable those algae-fostered super heterotrophic communities to actually more inefficiently, but to tap deeper into this refractory carbon. And by doing this, and you use up more and more carbon through the microbial loop, and this carbon is used more inefficiently, more of the provided energy through the photosynthetic processes gets allocated to the microbial loop, and that is at the expense of higher trophic levels like invertebrates or fish communities, and that again could lead to a positive feedback loop in already degrading reef systems. So it kind of gives away how those changes in the microbial community can lead to or can make them able to tap deeper into refractory carbon, but I'm still not really sure what or why this gets triggered. And I've been talking with Thomas, and based on his talk, I think there might be some ideas and some things how you could actually look into this. And I know here in this room there are also a couple of people who have been dealing with this and who probably know more about this than I do. But for the time being, I want to thank you all for your time. I hope I can talk to a whole lot of people in here, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Time for one or two questions. Anybody?
So I'm not sure what you exactly mean with tapping deeper into this.
So we see, usually we know, right, that the semi-label standing stock of dissolved organic carbon in ocean environments is in between 60 and 70 micromole per liter. And whatever you do, normally, even as a microbe, you cannot use this refractory carbon which is just out there. But if we get those changes to algae-dominated systems, we see that we get even lower concentrations, which are below this 60 or 65 micromoles per liter, which is usually not touched by the microbial community. And so there were some papers who, like, it's the whole priming thing, right? You give a pulse of organic carbon, you change the metabolism, and that enables this microbial community or whatever community to tap deeper into the carbon sources. And I think this might be some mechanisms how this might be done.
Okay, so we've kind of run out of time anyway, so let's have a tea break now, and if you have more questions you can ask during the tea break.
Thank you.